Good morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Fascinating to read this Sunday Times investigation. It's a fantastic investigation by the Insight team. China, the World Health Organization, and the power grab that fueled a pandemic, they say. A lot of what they're talking about is what happened at the top echelons of the World Health Organization, their dealings, their financing, and with China, and how this basically it was spilled over into how the World Health Organization tackled the pandemic in the early weeks and months. And well, we we all know the story from that point onwards. But a lot of this isn't new, is it? A lot of this has been known, has been talked about. As we've had scientists, we've had international correspondents, investigative reporters. Many have been talking about this for a very long time and have been dismissed out of hand as conspiracy theorists. But turns out they're not.
Yes, in the early months of the pandemic, in January and February last year, there were very clear signs that the possibility of this virus having come from a laboratory needed to be taken seriously. The possibility that the virus would cause a pandemic needed to be taken seriously. And yet the World Health Organization was consistently reassuring us that human transmission wasn't happening because the Chinese government told it that right up until quite late in January. And the possibility of a laboratory leak was dismissed out of hand, and the World Health Organization did nothing to press that. When it finally investigated, alongside Chinese scientists, the origin of the pandemic at the start of this year, after negotiating for 6 months over how they were going to do it, they went in and essentially agreed with the Chinese that they would only mention a lab leak if they didn't pursue it any further at the World Health Organization, which is really shocking. You know, we have no other way than through the World Health Organization to try to hold countries to account when a pandemic breaks out in their country. And just imagine if a pandemic that killed millions of people had started near Porton Down in Oxford, in wherever it is, Wiltshire, where the British research is done on viruses. Would we have insisted as a country that the World Health Organization not investigate, not take seriously the possibility that a laboratory leak should be investigated? We're talking of that sort of probability. And yet those of us who began to raise questions about this, and I was quite late to it, I didn't start talking about this till April or May last year, were told we were nutters, conspiracy theorists. I mean, I remember a World Health Organization publicity person trying to get an article of mine killed at the Wall Street Journal because it was a ridiculous conspiracy theory.
I mean, it's really quite extraordinary, isn't it? And indeed, even the issue of the lab leak, again, when Donald Trump was talking about it, it was just poo-pooed as absolute nonsense by anyone and everyone in America, internationally, all the organizations. As soon as Joe Biden said it was a serious possibility, suddenly it was acceptable to discuss this on social media and not get your account pulled. I mean, there's been a really strong backlash against this until it became something that was acceptable to say. And a lot of people.
Curiously, it's backfired on them.
Yes.
The World Health Organization investigation and the press conference in February was such a farce that actually the world began to sit up and say, hang on, something needs to be properly investigated. And now we've got the Chinese saying a lab leak is quite a likely theory. Only they're saying it came from University of North Carolina. That's the lab they think it came from. And they're using exactly the same arguments as we've been using about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which happens to be a few hundred yards from where this outbreak started, rather than, or at least a mile or two at most, rather than 10,000 miles in the case of University of North Carolina.
And it does matter where this came from, because we need to prevent the next pandemic. There were concerns about those wet markets in China in previous pandemics. There have been concerns that these were a risk. And we find it extraordinary, this idea that China can control everything that every one of their citizens does at all times, but can't control whether a wet market exists or not. But if it is from leaks from these labs and again, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, it's just, inadequate security and protection in these labs, not someone deliberately leaking this to control the world and the Great Reset or anything. But if we don't know what the cause is, we can't tackle this in the future. So it does matter. Let's also talk about Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Been accusations for quite some time that he rose, as often is the case in these scenarios. He's sort of a sort of no-mark former health minister, from Ethiopia, suddenly becoming, the World Health Organization head. And that it was with Chinese connivance and backing and support that he did, and that was the accusation is that was in return for which that he would support Chinese policies. How much evidence is there for this? Because these are very serious allegations against Dr. Tedros.
Well, the Director General of the World Health Organization was a woman called Margaret Chan, who was a Hong Kong Chinese, but she was very friendly with the Beijing regime. This is in the early 2010s, and used to visit North Korea and she made the wife of Xi Jinping into a special ambassador for the World Health Organization. And there were some pretty odd decisions taken under her leadership, including the very, very poor reaction of the WHO to the Ebola outbreak in Guinea and elsewhere, where they ignored pleas from Médecins Sans Frontières and others to declare a pandemic or an epidemic in that case early. And then when she stepped down, there was a contest to succeed her between a British doctor who'd investigated that Ebola failure called Peter Nabarro and Tedros, the former foreign secretary of Ethiopia and a former Marxist guerrilla leader. And the rules for how to choose the person for that job were changed at the time, so that all 194 countries got a vote. And lo and behold, China went around saying, if you vote for Tedros, you might get a new runway or a new road or something like that.
Yes.
It wasn't, of course, quite that explicit.
But money does talk in these scenarios. I mean, just finally and briefly, I mean, with the World Health Organization and with the United Nations, appointing countries like Saudi Arabia to chair human rights committees and the things like that, we are in a nonsense situation with a lot of international organizations where countries like China and Russia do hold sway. Is it time for the Western democracies to organise their own international bodies where decisions are made by Western democracies and not totalitarian military states?
Well, my pay grade is not high enough to work out how to do that, but I agree with you. Something like that we do need to start thinking about, and we need to turn this into a Chernobyl moment for the Chinese regime, if necessary, but also for the World Health Organization to say, look, come on, things can't go on as they are. Next time there's a pandemic, we need an organization that is more neutral, more objective, and more prepared to say boo to a goose to some of its paymasters.
Lord Ridley, a Conservative peer and author, thank you very much.